Prem Tumkosit here, managing partner of Boundless Health Capital, formerly at Merck Global Health Innovation Fund. And throughout my entire career, the common thread has been working at the intersection of health and life sciences. And what we're trying to do at Boundless Health Capital is invest in the intersection of health, bio, and tech. And I'm hopefully going to use the next 15 minutes or so to try to get you guys onto that train as well and convince you that that is a worthwhile effort. And I figured we'd start from the beginning, right? This is a problem that has been facing the biopharma industry for the past few decades. The interesting contrast here is that there is, most people are familiar with Moore's law, which is the idea that computational capacity will increase every 2 years or so, right? And that's actually largely held true. This is a paper that was published in 1965 by Gordon Moore, who's one of the co-founders of Intel. And that's largely held true. There's some debate now whether or not we're reaching the max of that. But what's equally true is an observation that was highlighted by Scannell et al. In 2012, and they call it Eroom's law, which is more backwards, right? And this is the decline in pharmaceutical productivity over the years. And so what it says is essentially every 9 years or so, drug development doubles in cost. And this is weird, right? Because all of the inputs going into the pharmaceutical development process are accelerating, right? From genomic sequencing, from computing power, all that stuff is getting a lot cheaper, better, faster. But the problem is that drug development still is getting more and more expensive over the years. And most recent data I've seen have put the cost somewhere around, $2 to $4 billion for drug development. So what's really causing this issue? So Scannell points to a few different potential causes. One is that he calls it better than the Beatles. He's a big fan of the Beatles and loved listening to them all the time, right? So imagine that every song that you had to create would have to be better than the Beatles, right? This is the problem that we have in the biopharmaceutical industry, where every drug has to be better than the existing drugs in the market before it. And right now we have, lots of unmet need in the market for sure, but generally pretty good drugs in a lot of different areas, right? There's also a tendency to throw money at it. So being part of large institutions and biopharma companies in the past and working for Accenture, which is one of the big benefactors of this problem, is that companies do tend to throw lots of budgets at projects for internal issues that they see, right? So this is just a tendency of large companies, and biopharma is no different. Then there's the brute force research method, right? So essentially, what we're looking at with drug discovery is that this is a scientific problem where you're trying to understand, and a clinical problem, right? You're trying to understand what therapeutics can address, and you're going to new avenues of discovery. The temptation is to convert that into an engineering problem and trying to throw lots of resources again at it through bit screening, et cetera. And so there's a brute force temptation that a lot of companies go to try to find new drugs. And that, as we'll discuss a little bit later, is not as productive as thinking about the biology. And the last part is costless regulator, which is the idea that regulators over time have made it harder and harder or more expensive for companies to conduct the experiments that they have been able to do in the past to discover new drugs. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. We're doing research in a much more ethical, safe, and effective way now than we were in the 50s or so. So I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but this is, additive to the cost that Scannell points out. And how's this related to digital health that we've been talking about this morning, right? Well, digital health exists in the context of molecular therapeutics. So a lot of digital health companies will be built on the chassis of current therapeutic areas that have existing drugs. We're subject to the same macroeconomic considerations, domestic healthcare spending, aging populations that pharmaceuticals are subjected to. And there's increasingly focus on tools and cost benefit of these types of digital health interventions. I included some of the Peterson health and technology reports that go through and really try to outline, well, what are the cost benefit analysis of different therapeutic areas. And if you haven't read these, you should go back and read them. They're very interesting. And of course, the reimbursement landscape is evolving as well. And so there's a reimbursement picture that we all have to worry about. So, but luckily, there's a new kid on the block, right? We just talked about AI and how that's going to solve all problems. This was an article from IBM in 2020. But actually, we've been talking about this for a really long time. On the right is a Fortune magazine cover from 1981. showing some work that some of my colleagues previously at Merck and Company have done in the computer-aided drug design area, right? So we've been talking about this for a really long time. And so this isn't really anything new. But why hasn't this really produced a huge revolution in the way we think about life sciences drug discovery, right? And there are a few challenges that there's another paper that was a couple of papers published by Bender and Cortez Soriano back in 2021 that talk about what are the challenges for using AI in drug discovery, right? One is the data quality and curation. Again, read this with the digital health lens if that's your field, but I think you'll see that there are very similar analogies here, right? Data curation and quality, data availability tends to be poor. Disease models, right? So how do we test in vitro and in a fast way whether drugs are successful against a disease area, right? Those tend to be the easy ones have been exhausted. They're the ones that we have right now, especially in areas like oncology and others, tend to be relatively poor because these are really complex diseases with really complex underlying biological and clinical issues. Biological complexity tends to be really challenging, right? Because we have, again, all the reasons above, these are not mutually exclusive reasons, but chemistry has been a better field for AI so far than biology has. And then, current approaches really prioritize looking at the the binding effects of small molecules to targets, as opposed to really looking at the clinical prevalence of these therapies, right? And the quality aspects I want to go back to for a second is a lot more important than the speed or the cost reduction aspects of the drug discovery process, right? So what they're positing is that a 20% reduction in either speed or cost actually doesn't lead to that much of a benefit. What really adds to the benefit here is an increase in quality in the rubric that's used. And so quality is where they think AI should be focused on. And quality in this case means the success of drugs passing through each clinical stage. There's another study that noted that a small amount, 0.1 absolute change in coefficients, correlation coefficient between clinical output, may offset 10 to 100 times the high throughput brute force activities, right? So a small change in quality can have a really big effect in terms of overall efficacy. And the reason this hasn't really affected drug discovery in a really dramatic way yet, although I'm hopeful, is that you can think about the drug discovery process and approval process as a very long hurdle race with many, many steps. So having efficiencies sort of at the earlier stages doesn't necessarily translate to wins overall. There's still lots of different hurdles in the way. So there are lots of different small problems that lead to a myriad of different steps that lead to final commercial success and approval for these drugs. And this is a really challenging problem that AI is currently tackling. But there is some hope. There is some hope. There's a study that's published this year by BCG that said that molecules in phase 1 from AI native biotech. So these are biotechs that have grown up in the AI space that are fully sort of AI native, if you will, have had an 80 to 90% success rate for phase 1 drugs, which is really high compared to the industry standard of 40 to 65%. Right, phase 1 studies, ones that study safety within people. And then that success rate goes down to 40%, which is more the industry standard when you look at phase 2. Phase 3 data is still a little bit TBD. This is a very low-powered study. There are not that many molecules yet in the clinic that are from AI-native biotech. So, but there is some hope, right, to looking at this picture. Which, and if you look at the drugs that are in the portfolio in 2023, we'll see that play out over the next few years or so. So that got me thinking about what if we were to redesign the biopharma company from today, what would that look like, right? And so on the left, you take a look at what biopharma essentially is in a very simplified form, right? There's an asset portfolio or capability portfolio that's developing therapeutics that goes through a sales force and med affairs to reach patients, right? And there's sort of a linear progression of pushing therapeutics into the clinic. If you take a digital first model, right? You might start with a engagement platform or data platform that seeks to understand the needs in the patient side and the patient and physician community side, and develop those insights into and think about how do you develop that into an insight-based portfolio, right? So how do you flip the script and think about the needs of the community and unmet needs to then go into the portfolio itself. And what in working in this space for the past several years, what I've seen is that there's a real funding gap and a market opportunity for companies at the Series A stage that play at the intersection of traditional verticals. So the way we think about traditional healthcare verticals, in the spectrum of drug discovery all the way to digital health on the other side, this is how late stage investors talk about it. This is how companies tend to think of themselves. This is how they tend to be categorized by a number of different entities. But if you look at the next generation of companies that are coming and emerging from the Series A stage, you have companies that are really blending different business models across these different fields. And I think that's really exciting. The problem that we're running into is that these companies are having a hard time fitting the traditional models that we have, both from an investor perspective as well as a market perspective. And so they struggle and have to essentially choose their path and go into one of these fields once they get into the Series A or B stage, because that's just simply not an option for them to go into these hybrid models. I think there's a real opportunity there, and that's why we founded Boundless Health Capital, to invest in companies at these stages that have hybrid models that blend these interesting business models. And the reason for that is because we think that these companies are producing the most interesting proprietary data that is clinically linked to multiomics, that are producing large and unbiased data sets that can be longitudinal as well. So these are solving some of the data quality issues that are holding AI back from really achieving its full potential. And we think these companies who are blending these different data and business models are going to be the ones that generate the platform for the next generation of Gen AI and tools. And the environment, we've talked on this before. We talked about the data from Fin Partners, and Bill mentioned as well. Funding is still very selective for companies, right? It's still really hard for companies at this hybrid in these hybrid models. So that presents an opportunity, I think. There's a point. I was talking to a transaction lawyer the other week, and his ominous prediction was 2025 is going to be really busy, right? Which is always something you have to worry about when that's coming from the lawyer. But Rock Health had a good quote, which is, if I've learned anything from the choppy post-pandemic waters in digital health, it's to avoid conflating volume of activity with quality of activity. So there's going to be a lot of stuff happening in 2025. I think that's very true. I think we've seen that. Whether or not that ends up being good or bad for companies is different. But I think that's what that means, that there's going to be a lot of opportunities. And what we've seen is that there's been just a huge number of bridge round financings from the 2021, 2022 timeframe into today. Companies are motivated to transact. I think people have become a lot more realistic about what they can get in terms of returns. Consolidation is happening across the industry and should happen more across the industry. At the same time, I think the startups who have gone from seed to Series A have emerged with really high quality. Going to this next phase because they have had to stretch themselves. They've benefited from the benefits of having AI tools and really sophisticated business models more than other startups we've seen at Series A stage. And I think there's still quite a lot of advancement to be happen in underlying technologies. But what we're facing is an uncertain regulatory environment. There's cost pressures across the whole healthcare industries, and there is still some big macroeconomic questions that could weigh down the public markets. So with that, would love to get your thoughts on this thesis. If you think that's interesting, if not, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Would love to hear your thoughts and work with you guys to either develop, invest in, or fund the next generation of companies that are on this path. So thank you again.